Welcome to Autism ADHD TV with Holly. That's me, a neurodivergent therapist, mom, and passionate advocate for affirming approaches. Maybe you're a parent trying to support your neurodivergent child or teen, a therapist or educator wanting to learn more, or you're a neurodivergent person looking for strategies that truly honor who you are. Whatever brought you here, you're in the right place. We talk about the real stuff: emotional regulation, self-awareness, executive functioning, self-advocacy skills that build confidence, social connections that are authentic, and so much more. And hey, if you're looking for deeper learning, check the description notes below for information on my parent workshops and continuing education trainings for therapists. You're going to love it. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and give us a like so you never miss out. And if you find Autism ADHD TV helpful, please share it with someone, because together we can create more understanding about neurodiversity. Now let's get into it. Welcome everyone. Before we jump into this amazing episode, I want to share this lovely review. It's on the last episode on working memory. If you haven't heard it yet, absolutely go back there and take a look. Notes everywhere. It says, Holly, my 3-year-old, 8-year-old, 13-year-old, 15-year-old, and 57-year-old selves were standing and cheering while wiping tears. We've been seen. Sharing your experience in such a vulnerable way was so healing. I've understood this information intellectually before, but it's the first time that I've really absorbed this. Seeing myself in your story, so passionately shared, was balm for the shame which still resurfaces. Thank you. I feel honored when people review the podcast. I feel teary with you because this is hard. Leila, you and I both know this professionally and personally. Everyone, Leila Beikmohomadi is a fabulous psychologist in our practice at Crossvine. Welcome, Leila.
Thank you. I'm so excited to finally be on here.
Two ADHD psychologists come together and try to work on scheduling. Sometimes it takes a little bit.
Absolutely.
We're talking about processing speed, and processing speed touches kind of everything in life. If you're a parent thinking, oh my goodness, yes, that's why homework takes 3 hours and my child's on the floor. Or that's why my kid just freezes up when I ask them to do something. If you're feeling that, this is a great episode for you. Maybe you're a therapist and you're wondering why they're really struggling academically and also socially. Leila, are you ready to talk about what processing speed is?
Absolutely.
Picture your brain is a really complex computer that's getting information from everywhere, all over the place. What you are seeing, hearing, feeling, all of those things are coming in. And processing speed is how quickly that computer can sort through all of that information and then give you a response. You're taking it in, your brain's noticing the information, you're making sense out of it, figuring out what it actually means, deciding what to do. So you're picking out how to respond and then actually doing the response. For neurotypical people, that happens really fast, like a blink of an eye, milliseconds. For some neurodivergent kids and teens, one or more of those steps that I just mentioned may take longer. It doesn't mean that they're not smart. It's not that at all. The kids that we work with are smart in so many ways. They just process things at their own pace.
Processing speed is one of those skills that is commonly tested on cognitive tests, if you get a psychological evaluation, we see so many times neurodiverse kids and teens can have a lot of differences in their cognitive profiles, which means sometimes their processing speed is actually in what is called the average range. But then some of their other skills that are tested come a lot easier to them, right? They may still struggle with frustration because taking that information in is going to feel a lot harder than some of the other skills they need to do, like solving new problems, thinking about things visually. And when there's those differences, that can lead to frustration because it does feel so different. So I also like to just emphasize that whenever we're talking about working memory, processing speed, it's, really individualized for each person.
We're getting information that falls in the average range. That doesn't mean that we stop there. We're looking at the whole picture. Layla and I, we do deep dives in the evaluation because we don't want to miss anything. Say there is a high score in verbal comprehension, for example, but there's an average score in processing speed. That can be incredibly difficult socially because you think, oh, look at this high score. That's easier for them, right? But the processing part is super frustrating. You might see kids get really anxious, they'll shut down, emotional dysregulation can come up. Those are things you need to consider because that can still be a gap there between that average score and their other scores. Let's chat really quick about what it looks like in a home. Usually, parents are with their children and teens more than everyone else. They are in the perfect spot to notice these things. Picture this: you're trying to get ready for school in the morning, and you have asked your child to get dressed like 10 minutes ago. And then you check on them, and they are sitting on their bed, staring into space, or doing something completely different. You feel super pressured. Or homework. Your child sits down to what might take 20 minutes, and somehow 3 hours later, they're falling out of their chair and they're on number 3. They may even be crying at this point, and you may even be crying at this point. When you think about dinner time, everyone's talking about their day, and your neurodivergent child wants to contribute to the conversation. They want to jump in, but by the time they're thinking through what they want to say, everyone has moved on and the topic has changed. And then they're feeling really upset and they may have a hard time telling you exactly why. These are real differences in processing, and they're trying to figure out how to respond. Do you want to look at the school stuff?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about processing speed at home, but of course, these challenges can come up at school. And I think it's especially important to talk about these challenges at school because home for so many of these kids is their safe environment where they're comfortable. School may not be that. That can just make these processing differences come up more. It can be related more to anxiety, which we'll go over in more detail later. Our whole education system is how fast we can get things done. Everyone remembers doing those math facts fluency or seeing how fast you can go through addition, multiplication, subtraction. Processing speed challenges can mess up pretty much everything at school. Understanding what the teacher is saying, reading smoothly, organizing their thoughts, writing stuff down, typing, remember information they've learned before. And all of this can be challenging, especially anything that's timed. So I'll break down in a little more detail specific ways that these processing speed differences can come up. With reading and processing speed differences, it can look like a kid who can totally sound out words correctly, but reads super slowly and then loses track about what they've just read. They may have to reread the same paragraph multiple times because they forget something, maybe they get distracted. And that can also lead to challenges with understanding what they've read, that reading comprehension. That's so important, especially as a child gets older in school. Reading fluency becomes a huge challenge because they're working so hard to decode, right? And then that comprehension just falls apart. Often shows up with trouble quickly recognizing numbers and symbols, remembering math facts, or even working through some of these longer word problems and forgetting what the question is that is being asked. They may get a math concept, but bomb those timed multiplication tests. They know what 7 times 8 is, but then doing it under pressure timed, pulling it from their memory just doesn't feel accessible to them. Writing can feel like torture because they're trying to juggle so many things at once. Thinking about what they want to say, organizing their thoughts, spelling, grammar, and actually physically writing their thoughts on the paper. When their processing speed is slower, this mental juggling act becomes so exhausting. Even when they have great ideas, getting them organized and onto paper feels really hard.
I was feeling anxious, Leila, while you were talking about processing school. And I haven't been in school for a long time. When you were talking about the reading and then keeping what you're reading in mind and then adding to the information while you continue to read, it is really difficult and then frustrating when you're having to reread it. And especially when everyone else has moved on, because school is built on being fast. There's a lot of curriculum you have to get to. And then you feel
Absolutely.
behind. Everyone else is getting ready to transition to the next activity when you're still doing that same work.
As you were saying that, I was thinking about standardized tests, those EOGs. As we all know, those are big time tests. There can be accommodations for those, but right, just knowing that added pressure of these things that you have to take so frequently, that really feels like everything rides on this, even though we know as therapists that's not the case. They're just tests. But when you're in that school environment, there's so much preparation for those too.
Then, of course, the rumor that goes around where if you don't pass the EOGs, then you don't get to go to the
Right.
next grade. There's just so much pressure. Also, that societal pressure. When you're a kid, you're noticing that other kids are getting done more quickly, and that somehow seems better. Like doing it faster seems better. For some reason, we have that in our culture. When you're done first, that's first place.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked a little bit about specific subjects, but more generally, following directions can become a nightmare when the teacher is giving multiple step instructions. By the time that a student has processed step 1, they've missed steps 2 through 5. They might look around confused while everyone else is getting started. That can also lead to them getting in trouble, right? Because it may seem like they're not doing what they're supposed to do, when really their brain is still just trying to process the first step, right? So for teachers who maybe aren't as understanding for processing speed differences, can lead to even more stress for these kids and teens. Taking notes in class becomes basically impossible when the teacher is talking faster than a student can process and write down stuff. They're still trying to write down something from 5 minutes ago while missing what's happening in class right now. I even remember I was so focused in class on getting down all the information and writing it that I wouldn't even take in the information. I was just focused on getting the notes down. It is important, but it's not just about the notes, it's about learning the information.
I remember that too. I could not write fast enough. You're trying to take notes, but then you can't hear what the teacher's saying, if that makes sense. And then if
Yeah.
you're still writing with your last thought, and then your thought is interrupted or your brain is interrupted by another thought, the teacher may be 10 steps ahead, which can make understanding what's happening and note-taking difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. Tests can be a nightmare, and not just because of that time pressure, but also students with slower processing may use up so much brain power just trying to understand what the question is asking. And then they don't really have anything left to actually show what they know. They may know the material perfectly, but run out of time, get overwhelmed by the format. We see this so much, especially with like essay questions, figuring out those open-ended questions, which are important for learning, but They can just be when you already have multiple choice questions, fill in the blank, and an essay, right? That can just lead to some of these kids that completely overwhelms them.
Yeah, I agree. Essay was absolutely the hardest for me. Or fill in the blank when there isn't a list of options. You're already anxious for taking the test, and then you're even more anxious. Where do you start? What's enough information? What if I don't put enough in?
It can be something you know so much about, but when there's that stress and anxiety and you just keep repeating it in your head, almost like that sense of panic sometimes. Social stuff at school can get tricky. These kids may miss out on social cues, not catch on to jokes or sarcasm, or it takes so long to process what someone said that the conversation has moved on. And lunch and recess, which are ideally supposed to be the times we have breaks, can actually be a lot more exhausting than class time because social interactions require such fast processing and those social connections are so important, right? So many of the kids we see just want to be accepted and included with their peers. And when it feels hard to keep up with the conversation, that can feel like an impossible task.
You may see kids that avoid social interaction for that reason.
Right.
Oftentimes, my clients will tell me, I'm worried that there'll be an awkward pause. If your processing speed is not the same as a lot of other people around you, that may be the case, that you actually do need to pause to be able to think through what someone meant. Or maybe there was a joke, but you're not laughing and the other person doesn't understand why. It gets really tricky because everyone is scared of this awkward pause. So much so that they may not even talk to another person because of it.
Yeah. And then lastly, this one was a huge one for me when I was in school, participating in class discussion. These discussions can be fast paced, change directions, can make it difficult to keep up. It's further complicated by that fear of judgment from peers. Am I going to say the right thing? A lot of times, a big part of grades are reliant on participating. For a lot of neurotypical folks, these discussions are how maybe they learn, but it can just feel so overwhelming, right? It moves so fast. There's this pressure. I just remember as a kid in class always feeling so much dread when I would get the syllabi at the beginning of the semester and see there's a big participation grade. I would always be so anxious going into class. I couldn't even focus on what was being taught because I would just be so afraid of being called on.
Well, Layla, you're not alone because I felt the same way. Like, how am I going to do that if I already am so anxious and nervous that I'm going to get something wrong? When I knew the answer, I would raise my hand because I was so excited to share, but that's not when I got called on. It was usually when I wasn't having my hand up. I spent a lot of the time in class just worried that I would be called on. All my energy was being drained because I was worried, what if I get called on?
It's stressful. I really wish that wasn't as big of a piece than like grades and classes.
I understand part of it, but it needs to be modified because social communication differences are definitely important when you're working with neurodivergent kids and teens. The mental health part of this doesn't get enough attention. Processing speed differences can just make this massive negative impact on the mental health of kids. Imagine feeling like you're running constantly to catch up with a world that's moving entirely too fast. You're smart, you're capable, but you feel like you can't show what you know because you need a little more time, but no one else seems to understand. They just know that you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. Of course, you see that anxiety pop up. You mentioned time tests, social situations, basically anything where there's this pressure to respond quickly. Anxiety actually makes processing speed even slower. It is this really tough cycle. We talk about anxiety, and there's depression there too, because kids start internalizing these struggles. I must be lazy. I must be stupid. What's wrong with me? I'm slower than the other kids. When they notice all these other kids are getting done quicker, then they assume that something is wrong with them. So anxiety eats up the working memory resources that your brain needs to process information efficiently. They're worried about being judged, messing up, not finishing on time. Then you have these repeated experiences of not being able to keep up. So then that creates anticipatory anxiety. They're not even in school yet, and they're worried about it because they're thinking about that. Oh my goodness, this is going to happen again. It's going to not be good for me. How am I going to handle all this work? And then because they're anxious, the processing is even slower. And that's understandable when you've had all this anxiety and sadness attached to school. It makes sense of why you would be nervous for it to even start.
I never really had someone tell me, right, doesn't mean that you are a bad student or that you're bad at this subject. No one normalized. That was something that a lot of people can have differences or challenges with. It wasn't until I was an adult and I was in college, oh, I'm actually like not dumb, right?
Yeah.
It's just like I was in an environment that I had control over and that I could like make it the way that worked best for me.
There isn't a lot of control in school. There just
Right.
isn't. It's you've got to show up and you've got to cover this amount and you got to move on. And someone with lower processing speed, whew, that's just a nightmare. Not only are you going to tell yourself, is that taking you so long? All these other kids are done. And then the other kids notice. Or if a teacher not trying to have the child feel bad at all, but they feel pressure to get through this amount of information a day. It's really everyone feeling pressured. Layla, processing speed can also be really fast. It doesn't mean that faster is better. Let's talk about that really quick because we see that too when we're doing evaluations.
Really fast processing speed can be helpful in a lot of situations, but it can also lead to challenges with getting impatient when everyone else may process things slower. They can rush through things, make silly mistakes because they're going too fast, have trouble slowing their thinking down for more detailed work, getting frustrated in group settings where they have to wait for other group members. They can also feel anxious when they're forced to work at a slower pace. Or maybe something I've seen a lot too is there's just busy brains and they need, right, stimulation. They need things to help their brains feel better, right?
It is true because when we're talking with parents and going through the information for evaluations, we always are looking at all of the angles, all the things that they might see in school, how this plays out in real life. You would think, oh, that's a higher number. That's probably really easy for them. It's not. This might be something you hear about rushing through work. You need to slow down. If I slow down, I feel anxious or bored. There's so much to processing, whether it's lower than expected, and even when it's average because other areas may be higher. It's important to pay attention to all of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about how processing speed can get complicated socially. So let's jump in there really quick because the social world moves fast and it can be really hard to keep up with it. And conversations are just back and forth really quickly. Jokes have timing. If you don't laugh, then someone probably feels bad that you're not getting their joke. It's hard to figure out these super subtle social cues that happen when you're still processing something that happened before that.
Yeah. I think another piece too, right, there can be really challenging parts of conversations, but then we hear a lot, right, from parents, teachers, even the clients we work with that when it's related to something that they're interested in, something that they enjoy. It almost feels like the conversation comes easier, right? Or maybe those differences don't feel as noticeable to them. And I think there can be a lot of reasons why that happens, but I think a lot of it is like less anxiety in those situations, right? They feel more comfortable, more excited. There's less pressure. It's something that feels good for them. And I think that can be incorporated with ways that teachers and parents and even our teens and kids can advocate for themselves.
Because sometimes that's confusing for parents and educators and therapists. How can they be responding more slowly over here, but then are super fast about their interest? That is a completely different thing. You're less anxious. You're confident in what you know about this interest because you think about it a lot. You've learned a lot about it. You probably feel more confident talking about it. But that can also look like you're teaching instead of having a conversation or presenting on your interests, and that gets complicated too.
Yeah.
It may look like you're correcting other people or telling them that they should think of it the way you do instead of the way they do. That brings in some other skills. Groups can go one of two ways. Some kids feel left behind, like they're not really in this group, they're just physically there. Maybe. By the time they figure out what someone's saying or thought to say something back, the group again has moved on. And if you try to bring the group back, that doesn't always go well. That could lead to social withdrawal or feeling like they don't belong or they feel like they're not really being included, probably because they're not. Sometimes kids with slower processing actually feel better in smaller groups. So they feel less pressure to be filling in those pauses or those gaps. And they feel like someone else can take over the conversation if need be. It depends on the child, the teen, what works best for them. And that's why I always talk about how to do social support individually because it really is so different for every kid.
What they need at school is going to be different than what they need maybe in an extracurricular.
Let's talk about working with the school. Say you're a parent or a therapist and you want to advocate. Sometimes a school or some staff may not be as familiar with processing speed. And that's understandable because as psychologists, Layla, you and I, of course, we're going to know a lot about that. We were trained specifically on how to do these tests and how to understand the importance of processing and what that looks like, especially in neurodivergent kids. I was not trained as an educator in the schools. Just like educators may not be trained to assess processing speed like a psychologist, it's important that we all come together with the knowledge that we have, the child leading the way, because they are the most important person on the team. Understanding that not all people will know the effects of processing speed on social interaction, on academic work.
One way to help parents and kids and teens advocate for themselves are knowing how processing speed affects them. We can't just say they're slow. We need to explain that they need extra time to process verbal information and what they need in addition, right, to someone speaking to them. Maybe they need a visual or that they need extra time to understand, or they know how to understand a math concept, but can't retrieve the facts quickly enough on a timed test. The ultimate goal is helping your kid learn how to advocate for themselves. And as they get older, giving them the language to explain their learning style and what they need in a school setting. So teaching them to say things like, I process information differently. I need a little extra time, or I understand better when I see examples first. Preventing internalizing these differences as I'm a bad student. I just can't do this. I'm bad at math.
I said that about myself
Yeah.
because that's what I thought. That's what I was presented with. I wasn't smart in whatever subject, like math.
Yeah.
And it's not an excuse.
I think we both tell all the parents we work with, right? They know their children better than anyone else. They know what their kids need. So trusting your instinct when something isn't working and not being afraid to speak up, because they need those advocates and eventually learning how to advocate for themselves. But really having that in those early years is so important.
I agree. And so I'm glad that you and I are going to be talking about what you can do in school for slower processing speed. It's important to understand the background and the reasons and the why and the impact, but okay, now what? What's next? How can we support this child? So I'm excited that you and I are going to talk about some ideas for that. The great news is there are so many options, and we're just going to talk about a few of them. And one of them is technology. Do you agree, Layla, that it has been a game changer?
Yeah, absolutely. I have seen it help so many of the kids and teens that we work with. Even for myself, it's been helpful.
It has been incredible. An option that I love, that I wish that you and I had when we were younger, was speech to text software. And it lets kids get their ideas down because some of them have the most amazing ideas without getting stuck in the writing part, because the writing can be so frustrating. Maybe their brain is working faster than their fingers, because fine motor skill challenges are common in neurodivergent kids.
Yeah, especially with writing.
Definitely. Sometimes kids will just melt down with the idea of having to write.
Right.
So here we're taking the barrier down, or one of them, to being able to, okay, how can I produce information showing that I'm learning this without getting stuck in the writing part?
And there's so many great apps out there now too. There's so many great resources that they can utilize both at school and at home.
And there are apps where you can just take a picture of a page and then fill it in
Yeah.
on your phone, online, on whatever device that you're using. It really has been helpful. And of course, I'm obsessed with visual timers because of my own time blindness. So that's also helpful. And there's different ways kids feel about this. One way can work well for one kid, and another way cannot work well for them. All these ideas and options about accommodation really does depend on what that child feels comfortable with. Sometimes speech to text works really well. Some kids like to leave their classroom and do that work in another classroom, and that feels better to them. Some kids don't like to leave because they feel uncomfortable leaving the class.
It depends on the child, but also can be different every situation too. I know I have my toolbox of things that help me. I don't use every tool every single time. I think that's the amazing thing, giving them the option, then eventually for them to choose what tools they want to use.
There's something lovely about knowing it's available. Like you mentioned, maybe they don't need it this time because they don't have to write more than 2 sentences. If they have 3 or more sentences, it's really helpful to know they have access to it. Knowing what is in that toolbox and being able to say, "I need this," and having that option all the time, I think can decrease anxiety.
It gives them the choice too, right? It comes back to, I think, a really big part of supporting any neurodiverse kid or teen, but especially with processing speed differences, is it gives them the autonomy and helps them be in charge of what works for them.
That brings me to another option that we have to think about too, is how do they communicate that need? We can have so many things in our toolbox, but if they don't know how or when or who to go to when they need access to something in that toolbox, We can't blame a child for not accessing these things that are available because it's not that. There's something else going on there. It may be the communication part. Maybe they're not sure what they need when they are struggling. There's so many things that we can do, obviously, in therapy too, to help with that. Something that's coming to mind right now is being able to communicate in a way that works best for that child, because we know communication becomes even more challenging when the anxiety is high. And oftentimes for kids with slower processing speed, it is higher. So thinking about having an option where a child can circle something on a page right on their desk. Maybe it's, I need more time. You can come up with the best accommodations, but we also have to understand when that child might need it, and they know when they might need it, or you know when to offer it, and how to break down that barrier.
Yeah. Yeah, to wrap it back around, instead of just giving them saying, this is what you're going to do every time there's written material, it really helps them learn what is going on when I feel like I need something like text to speech or when I need a visual. It's helping them build that self awareness so that they can understand, okay, I know this feels hard. I know this is what it's like when it feels hard, and this is what I need. And how can I communicate it? Which is not an easy task, right? All of those separately can take a long time to build. All together, it's even longer, but it helps them break that down.
When we are sitting at the table, if we're talking about a 504 or an IEP, we need to figure out how it will happen, like the how. And I think a lot of times we miss it. Another thing we need to consider are built in breaks. I don't know about you, Layla, but often my clients, and I know myself, I get drained. When there are processing speed differences, you're having to work overtime all the time. And if you don't have any break, it can really wear on you. Anxiety can increase. You may not want to go to school because it's so draining and because there is no time to recharge. And that can be really difficult because the more, again, anxious you are, the slower your processing speed will be.
Even in sessions, I always emphasize always can take a break because a lot of times, even just a short break can help us recharge.
Even if it is a short stretch break, even if it is going out and getting some water or going to the restroom, whatever that looks like, imagine that computer and all the information is coming in from everywhere constantly, and it's constantly working overtime. So even a minute between subjects, right? What can we do? Can we move around the classroom? Can we take a note to the office? Whatever that is, you can get really creative with it. A big one that is a good idea is extended time. And it's probably the most obvious, considering that kids sometimes need more time to get through it. This could mean more time on tests, more time on assignments, or even just more time processing instructions. Some kids need a lot longer and some kids don't. Now, Layla, I don't know what your thoughts are about this. If a child has extended time for all assignments and it does take them longer, I don't recommend pushing that into homework. I feel like that is so incredibly stressful. We are not meaning to, but it's punishing a child for slow processing. What I suggest is extended time for tests and things like that. Absolutely. But I think we need to consider the amount of work and how we're giving the work before we just provide extra days to turn in work, because that just piles up. And if a child does have trouble with organization, time management, initiation of tasks, then when will that extra work get done?
I hadn't thought about it like that, but even when I would have like deadlines extended in college or grad school, I would just wait, right, to start the work. It doesn't actually, yeah, it just like my brain is that's not something I need to worry about right now.
It's not an emergency. Yeah, and I think if we step back and look at the information that needs to be learned, that is really the goal. It's not, it has to be this amount of work to show this child has learned this information. That's what's so great about having options to show how someone has learned. Clear examples of the work and templates can be helpful, especially with those longer assignments where you can see a sample, what that looks like. Someone had to write a paper in school and it was so overwhelming. It's how do I even start? What is
Right.
the middle supposed to look like? What is this summary supposed to look like? So when you can show a finished project or product, that's a great thing. It doesn't have to be on that topic, but it could give them an idea of how to structure the work. So it reduces that cognitive load of trying to figure this out. And that is something that we don't really need to have the child do because it creates more and more stress. That's why some of that homework takes so long. It isn't really about the work, doing the work. It's about figuring out how to do it.
I think too, a place where examples and templates can be needed, but maybe hard to produce is with like creative writing things. Like I know never taken a creative writing class, but even in English, there's always a unit in high school or probably even middle school too, where you're required to write a story, make up a story. And there's really not a lot of structure given then, at least when I was in school. You have a month to figure it out, right? There's some planning. But even when we can't give exact examples and templates, like structuring to help go through this process. So it's not just have to make it all up, right? Out of your mind.
I remember getting stuck a lot and stressing over it doesn't sound right. They're not going to like it. It's not good enough. It's not detailed enough. Nope, it's a run-on sentence. Just so stressful. Asking for an example is a really good thing. And I know we'll probably dig in here a minute on self-advocacy. Timing concepts can be really helpful. Time blindness, I struggle with this even with a lot of help, even with the visual timers, even with body doubling. It can be really difficult for me. So we have to understand that time has to be taught. It's not automatic for a lot of neurodivergent kids. Other kids, they just seem to pick it up. For example, frustration can come up if they think that a worksheet is going to take 5 minutes. And then it's 10 minutes later and they're on problem 1. So you can see how that anxiety might come up. Looking at it with curiosity, which is a great way to do it, is I'm not exactly sure how long this will take. Maybe I can try out one and see how long that one takes.
Using that as a gauge for the rest of the worksheet. I love that idea.
We're only going to spend this much time on reading, and that's it. Time feels like forever, never, and always. And that is incredibly frustrating. It's not a choice to feel that way. Believe me, I feel it all the time. It's hard to explain if you don't live it yourself. It's frustrating and upsetting and anxiety provoking. That's where we feel all that time pressure too. It feels like everyone is in a hurry and then you're not fast enough. But then you also have to remember everything. Note taking is important. The older you get, the more they recommend that you learn how to take notes. I think it's a great way to review things and just to process them. Teacher notes can be really helpful, or if there's someone in class who has a great skill of note taking, maybe just using their notes too. I know a lot of kids do much better when a teacher is teaching and the notes are provided, but then there are also blanks. They can fill in a word here and there. Because reading and note taking can be hard, I think it should be an option where they are provided not only with the notes, but also a visual image that represents the information. That can be really helpful as far as processing.
Multiple ways of getting or taking in information.
Right. And just knowing what works best for you. Sometimes it's helpful to record, give you permission to record the class, and then you can play it back and listen to it. Or having slides. Teachers will use Google Slides. And some of my clients get copies of the slide for class. They can follow along, they can highlight those slides, they can make notes directly on the slides.
Sometimes, too, changing our environment can make a huge difference. A lot of times, this can be seen as going to a quiet testing space, having reduced visual distractions like a window or like a door that you can see the hallway, having them be able to flexible seating to help them focus their processing on the actual task instead of managing environmental overload. And this can be visual distractions, but we also have to think sound, smell, textures, right? Anything that is going to lead to overload, especially with our senses. It's important to know because that's going to make processing even harder.
Those are all really good. We could talk for a whole nother episode about accommodations in school. So maybe we should do that, Leila.
Yeah.
We're talking about things that you can do to help. Let's chat about HELM, routine and structure. Yeah, they need to know what's coming. Daily routines need to be predictable. They don't want to use all their brain power just trying to figure out what's coming. But that can also be hard for neurodivergent parents.
Good point.
I would love to be one of those people who are like, oh, yes, everything is routine. It's all predictable. Though we do the best we can, try to let them know ahead of time what's coming. Prep as much as you can. The night before, that's a beautiful thing. But any kind of visual schedule where they know what's coming so they don't have to worry and guess all the time. Right? So just do the best that you can. So all of you don't feel so rushed in the morning.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Feeling rushed in the morning just can be so stressful and impact your whole day.
Those parents out there rushing all the time, you're not alone. I see you. I feel like I need to say that. I see you because I'm the same way. So time awareness tools. Obsessed with the Time Timer Plus. But we mentioned earlier that someone who has slower processing speed, timers can also be stressful. You definitely want to be mindful of how you're using them. For example, if you're counting down to something really exciting, or they're going to be able to pick that song out on the way to school, whatever that is, notice how your child, how your client responds to time and timers, and see how you can help them with time, that it's a help, not a stressor.
A big sticky area or tough area for a lot of families can be someone feels misunderstood, or maybe there's this communication between family members that can feel like it's just not aligning, it's not working. So sometimes changing how we communicate with each other, really understanding what works best for the other person and implementing that in daily communication. For example, slowing down how you talk, giving instructions in smaller steps, or maybe just one step at a time. Check that they actually get what you're saying before moving on to the next thing. This doesn't always have to be the other person or the kid or the teen has to confirm verbally, having those options of circling, maybe putting a check mark on a whiteboard, right? Figuring out how someone likes to receive information and how they like to communicate that information too.
I like that you said that because you've got to have options. When you think about processing, it might be easier to give a thumbs up or thumbs down.
Yeah.
And it's also important to be mindful that some kids, I know my oldest child really struggles with this, would say he understood something when he didn't. He just didn't want to be singled out. He didn't want other kids to see that he might need more support. It's important to always check in and remind them that it's okay if you don't know. There are so many things that all of us don't know. You're allowed to not know the answer.
I think another tough area for so many families and parents is homework. Homework needs teamwork with teachers to figure out how much time we need to be putting into the homework. I know with many people I work with, and I'm sure this is for you too, Holly, getting through the whole assignment, even if it means taking the whole night and using all your brain power, is something I see so many of my clients do. And it just leads to stress for the parents, for the kid. Maybe we're not getting to other schoolwork. Maybe it's just disrupting our sleep. Is it better for the kid to do a few fewer problems and to struggle through everything? And also using skills like consistent workspace, body doubling, regular breaks, and again, that clear communication with the teachers too about how much time should we be spending on this work.
I would hate homework.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was so hard when I was a kid. I know that some people think it's very important, and I respect that, but maybe it's not 20 math problems. Maybe it's 10. Maybe it's 5. If a kid, which I see this all the time, is already at their max, they are drained, they just can't do one more thing after school, and then they have more. I'm not sure who agrees with me or not out there, but you think about all of this information stressing work-life balance, where you shouldn't work at home and you need to be present when you're home. But for some reason, that is out the window when we're talking about homework for kids. I get the reason to strengthen skills, but more often than not, what at least I see in my neurodivergent clients and for my own kids is just stress and anxiety. And then the parents are frustrated, and then parents are feeling pressure for their child to get the work done. And then they may be arguing. It just can create a lot of problems. When it comes to homework, we have to be really mindful about the capacity that our kids have at the end of the day, because their energy is drained faster than other kids. Yet we still expect them to have energy left when they don't. We also have to think about how other people process information in the home. There are going to be different processing speeds under one roof. A parent may have their own processing differences while trying to support a child with a different type of processor. A parent might be really fast paced with a child that has a slower processing speed, and this can create frustration between family members. It's important to understand your own processing speed and how you are approaching someone with a different processing speed, because one is not better than another. But if we don't consider those differences, it's just going to add to miscommunication, assumptions, misunderstanding, and more anxiety all the way around.
Yeah. It's also important to give everyone in the family the language to know how to understand those differences. So, for example, if there's other kids in the picture, they need to understand everyone learns and works differently and works at different paces. This can prevent teasing, create a more inclusive and supportive family environment, and also help siblings see their siblings aren't being slow on purpose. We're not getting special treatment when we're accommodating what they need. That's exactly what they're getting, right? They're getting the support they need, just like everyone should.
Exactly. I don't know why I just thought of this, but it made me think about something that just happened the other day. And I wanted to get something off of the top shelf in the kitchen. And I reached up and I got on my tippy toes. I could not reach it. I think it was sunscreen or something. I could have shamed myself for not reaching it, even though it wasn't possible. Or I can use an accommodation and go get that step stool. I could think, oh, that was smart that I thought to get the step stool. The way you're approaching it really matters for your mental health, right? Because it's not special treatment. It's actually what's needed to do what you're trying to do. It doesn't have to be the exact same way everyone else does it. I want to make sure that we talk about the word lazy. I cannot stand it. It brings up so much anxiety for me because that's what I got called when I was younger. There's just so much shame around it. Processing speed is misunderstood. And that's a lot of reason why we're having this conversation right now. We tell them, hurry up. You're not trying hard enough. You should have been done by now. And hurrying up when a child actually needs more time is the opposite of what we should be doing. Then they feel bad about themselves because they're not able to speed up like the other person expects. The parent is frustrated and the child is frustrated. But it's important to let them know that you see how hard they are working. And often they are working harder than other kids. They're trying to process all of these things, and it is going to be slower possibly than you expect. But that doesn't mean they're lazy. They're already feeling bad. They're already trying so hard. They're already so anxious. Calling them a name on top of it is not going to help.
Will make the situation even trickier or harder to navigate.
Instead of calling them lazy, we want to make sure that they understand that we know how hard they're working.
Another really big piece is care is so important for anyone, but especially for these kids and teens who are working, like you just said, so hard to keep up with processing demands in school, at home, with friends, everywhere. It's important, one, helping these kids and teens understand themselves and also understand how their brains work. Not about making excuses, it's about them developing that self-awareness and learning how to advocate for themselves and really setting them up for when they're older, right? And maybe more independent. How can I advocate for what I need? And this conversation can be trickier than you would think. It's hard to explain processing speed differences because processing speed affects so many different areas of life. I always love using analogies. Your computer has something in it that makes it run fast. Same with a car, taking in all this information. Using an analogy that works, that's based on the interest of whoever you're talking to.
I was just noticing all the tabs open on the computer. All the information that is coming in, plus having to pay attention and process what we're supposed to think of as the main information at the time. Yeah, it's really hard. I'm so glad that we got a chance to talk about processing speed and break it down and being able to say, this is what can be helpful for you. That way, they're not surrounded by shame. They're not huge self-critics because of thinking they're less somehow when they're not. Because there's lovely things about kids being more careful and creative
Yeah.
and just thinking deeply and noticing more details.
Right.
So thank you, Layla, for coming on and chatting with me today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's such an important topic that doesn't get discussed enough.
If you think your child may have slower processing, get that comprehensive evaluation. That's going to be incredibly important. You can learn more about how your child takes in information and also responds to information. If you are a therapist listening and you suspect that a client may have slower processing speed, it's always great to discuss that with the child's parent. Thanks, Layla, and I will see you down the hallway soon.
Sounds good. Bye, Holly.
Bye.
That's a wrap on today's episode. If you found this helpful, please consider hitting that like button and subscribe so you don't miss anything. And if you're thinking, oh, I know somebody who would really appreciate this episode, please send it on to them. Also, don't forget, go down to that description below because I have loaded it with free resources and information on my parent workshops and continuing education trainings for therapists. Everything you need to keep learning and growing. Thank you for being here, for caring, and for choosing neurodiversity affirming approaches. I look forward to seeing you next time on Autism ADHD TV. Take care.
All content provided is protected under applicable copyright, patent, trademark, and other proprietary rights. All content is provided for informational and educational purposes only. No content is intended to be a substitute for professional medical or psychological diagnosis, advice, or treatment. Information provided does not create an agreement for service between Holly Blanc-Moses, Crossvine Clinical Group, the interviewee, Holly Blanc-Moses LLC, and the recipient. Consult your physician regarding the applicability of any opinions or recommendations with respect to your symptoms or medical condition or the symptoms or medical condition of your family member. Children or adults who show signs of dangerous behavior toward themselves and/or others should be placed immediately under the care of a qualified professional.